I wanted a library to use the Interfax REST API to send faxes. Upland Software's official library is an extraordinary product, but lacked only two features that I really wanted. One was to send a fax to multiple destinations, which is called a batch by Interfax. And I also wanted a simpler process in the library for faxing any document whose size is greater than 8 megabytes. So I used a lot of the code, techniques, and concepts in Interfax's official library, which, by the way, can also be found on GitHub. And I wrote my own library, which got a subset of the features for their official library. Especially, there's no functions for inbound faxes. It's outbound only, but you can send a fax to multiple destinations. And my library also performs the extra steps to fax large documents. It does this automatically. Here you see how the constructor initializes an HTTP client to use in Ken's library. And you also see the methods that the library supports. Basically just enough methods to send a fax, get details about faxes that you send, such as whether they were successful or finished. If you send batches, you can get the batch ID to get all the faxes that belong to that batch. And it's broken down into sending a fax to a single destination, in other words, to just one contact with one fax number, or to multiple destinations. So we'll take a little bit more look at that here in 1 second. I've opened up Visual Studio to a program that I've written to test my library. That test application is also available on GitHub. Here's the source code for that Windows form. You can see here I'm going to have to enter my user ID and password. And I should point out a couple things. Interfax has a very cool feature, a simulator, where you can put in this dummy phone number for success or failure. So you can send faxes that really don't go to a destination, and you can test your product, and it simulates sending to a real fax destination. Okay, I've entered my user ID and password, and I wanted to point out I've also included some test data over here, just a couple dummy files, one even a docx file. Mostly we're sending PDFs. Okay, I've launched the application. Let's run some simple tests here. First we'll check my account balance, and then we'll send a fax, a 2-page fax using the simulator. And you can see what we get back here is a fax ID. We can take this fax ID and put it down here. Normally, I'm saving these in a database. And so I want to keep track of all the faxes that we sent so I can monitor their status. It takes them a little while. So if I run test 5 here, you can see the status is 0, which means it's done, it's completed. I could even put that same thing up here. Whoops. And take a look at that fax. Oh, sorry. Here we go. And we can look at those faxes. I don't really normally do this. On our system, I actually save the actual document that was faxed along with this fax number. And so I can actually display the actual document that was faxed. This is just showing you there's other ways to do it. Okay, let's send a fax to multiple destinations. I'm going to use this one here because it's kind of interesting. It'll show a picture over here. This is actually kind of cool. It's got a web browser here in my code to show what we're going to fax if it's a PDF document. And we're going to send it to 2 different people. We've got some special characters in here. And so let's send this fax to these 2 people. You can see we've already got a batch ID. So I'm going to take that and stick it right in here. And this will show you, as I mentioned before, we sent actually 2 faxes. So these are the actual 2 fax numbers that correspond to this batch ID. So again, in my system, I would be saving this batch ID and later determining what the 2 faxes are that belong to that batch ID, and I'm saving the document that was faxed for these. When you send a fax, you're paying by the page. So if a fax is over 8 megabytes, yes, you can have some documents that are small and still the file size is large. I mean, they're small, not very many pages. But if you have a lot of pages, this can be expensive to send a large file. So for testing, what I've done here is, I'll show you this in a minute, I've got some settings in the library that'll let us define what a large file is. So I'm back in Visual Studio, and here you can see the settings. There's a threshold to upload in chunks, which is what you have to do with large files, and I've set it to 7 million bytes. And the chunk size I've just arbitrarily set to 50,000. You may play with those for performance or whatever, but the idea here is for testing, you can set this way down to like 10,000 bytes, and it will use the process for uploading documents, large documents, and ultimately faxing them. So you can sort of send a large fax, fake it out, with actually sending just really small documents. And that concludes this tutorial. Have a good day.